"This bank is not a place for games," Patricia Caldwell said, loud enough for everyone beneath the marble ceiling to hear. Isaac Monroe stood at the teller counter in a faded brown coat, worn blue jeans, and leather shoes with the heels rubbed thin from years of walking factory floors. In his right hand was a plain white envelope folded so carefully it looked like something sacred. In his left hand was an old tin coin box that had once belonged to his mother. The lobby of Caldwell National Bank went quiet. Men in tailored suits turned from the private banking desk. A woman with a diamond watch lowered her phone. Behind the glass doors, the morning sun hit the polished floor so sharply that Isaac could see his own reflection under Patricia's expensive black heels. He did not look like the kind of man Patricia expected to carry a check for $10 million. That was the mistake. Jasmine Reed, the young teller behind the counter, had already opened the envelope. She had already seen the bank name, the routing number, the authorization stamp, and the amount written across the center. $10 million. Her hands had gone still, not because she doubted him, but because she understood the procedure. Large item verification, dual approval, issuing bank contact, fraud department review, private client notification. But before Jasmine could begin, Patricia stepped in, looked Isaac up and down, and decided the truth with her eyes. "Where did you get this?" Patricia asked. Isaac answered calmly. "It was issued legally. You can verify it." Patricia smiled in a way that did not reach her eyes. "You think we have not seen this trick before?" A few customers shifted closer. Isaac did not shout. "I am asking you to check it." Patricia lifted the check between two fingers like it was dirty. This is exactly why serious banks must be careful with people who walk in pretending to be millionaires. Then she tore the check in half. The sound of paper ripping moved through the lobby like a gunshot. Jasmine gasped. An old woman waiting near the deposit table stood up. Isaac looked at the two torn pieces on the counter. His face remained still, but something in his eyes changed. He asked one question. "Are you sure you wanted to do that?" Patricia said completely. Then the glass door behind the private offices opened. Regional Director Thomas Whitaker stepped into the lobby, saw Isaac Monroe, saw the torn check, and turned pale. He rushed forward, lowered his head, and said one word that made Patricia lose all color in her face. "Sir." The entire bank froze. But before that word changed the room, Patricia Caldwell believed she was protecting it. The downtown branch of Caldwell National Bank sat on the corner of Madison Avenue and 11th Street, inside a limestone building older than most of the businesses around it. Its brass doors were polished every morning. Its lobby smelled of lemon wax, new paper, and expensive perfume. A security guard stood near a brass rail. Private banking rooms lined the back wall with frosted glass and soft leather chairs inside. This was the branch where wealthy clients came to be remembered. Patricia knew them all. She knew which client preferred black coffee, which one wanted sparkling water, which one liked to be called doctor, and which one expected the branch manager to meet them before they reached the counter. She smiled before money spoke. If the suit was right, if the watch was right, if the voice was right, if the address on the account looked right. Isaac Monroe had none of those signals. He entered at 9:13 in the morning with rain still on his coat sleeves. The bell above the door gave a soft sound. The security guard glanced at him, then looked away without greeting him. A man waiting near the wealth management desk pulled his briefcase closer to his leg. A woman in a cream blazer watched Isaac cross the lobby, then whispered something to her husband. Isaac saw it all. He always did. But seeing disrespect was not the same as obeying it. He walked to the only teller who looked at him like a customer before deciding what kind. Jasmine Reed was 26, careful, and still young enough to believe procedure could protect people if the right person followed it. She had been with the bank for 6 months. Her name tag was slightly crooked. Her smile was nervous but real. "Good morning, sir. How may I help you today?" Isaac placed the white envelope on the counter. "I would like to deposit a check and open a foundation account." Jasmine nodded. "Of course. May I see the check, please?" Isaac slid the envelope forward. Jasmine opened it carefully. Then she stopped. Not because the check looked fake, because it looked serious. The paper was official cashier check stock from Dominion Trust. The watermark was visible under the lobby light. The amount was printed clearly, $10 million and 0 cents. Pay to the order of Isaac Monroe. Memo line, equity sale distribution. Jasmine looked up. Sir, for this amount, we will need to complete a large item verification and contact the issuing bank directly. Isaac nodded. That is why I came in person. She reached for the verification phone. Then, Patricia Caldwell saw the amount. Patricia had been walking across the lobby with a tablet in one hand, greeting a retired judge and his wife by name. She stopped mid-step. Her eyes moved from the check to Isaac's coat, then to his shoes, then to the old tin box beside his hand. Her face changed. It was not surprise. It was suspicion wearing perfume. Jasmine, Patricia said. Jasmine froze. Yes, ma'am. Patricia came behind the counter. What is this? A large item deposit request, Jasmine said. I was about to begin verification. Patricia took the check before Jasmine could object. She read the amount. Then she looked at Isaac. What account is this going into? Isaac answered, I would like to open a new foundation account today. Patricia repeated the words as if they offended her. A foundation account? Yes, with a $10 million check. Yes. For what purpose? Scholarships. A small laugh moved through the lobby. Not loud, not everyone, just enough. Isaac did not turn around. Jasmine did. Her face showed embarrassment that did not belong to her. Patricia leaned closer. Mr. Monroe, do you currently bank with us? No. Have you ever held a private client account at this institution? No. Then you expect to walk in off the street with no prior relationship wearing that and deposit a $10 million check? Isaac looked at her. Wearing that? Patricia realized too late that she had said the quiet part in a polished voice. She corrected herself. I mean, under these circumstances. Isaac said, the circumstances are simple. I brought a check. Your employee described the verification process. I agreed to it. Patricia looked at Jasmine. Did you verify his identification? Jasmine nodded.
His driver license matches the payee name. Did you authenticate the check?
That was what I was about to do. Patricia's lips tightened. You were about to call Dominion Trust on a check this size without calling me first. Jasmine lowered her voice.
The procedure says large item verification begins with issuing bank confirmation and then manager approval.
Do not lecture me on procedure. The words cracked across the counter. Jasmine went silent. Isaac watched her shoulders drop. That told him something important. Patricia was not only cruel to customers she looked down on. She also taught kind employees to be afraid. That was how a culture survived. Not by convincing everyone, by silencing the people who knew better. Mrs. Evelyn Parker watched from the deposit table. She was 78, dressed in a lavender coat with a cane hooked over her arm and a stack of pension papers in front of her. She had been coming to this branch for 11 years. She had seen Patricia glide across the lobby for wealthy clients and turn cold for people who came in with work clothes, accents, or questions that sounded poor. But this morning was different. This morning, Patricia was doing it in the open. Isaac said, I would like my check verified. Patricia smiled. Your check? Yes, and if it is real. It is. She lifted her eyebrows. Mr. Monroe, I have managed this branch for 14 years. I know fraud when I see it. Isaac's voice stayed even. No, you know what you expect fraud to look like. The room sharpened. Patricia felt the shift. So she did what insecure power often does. She made the stage bigger. She turned toward the lobby and held the check higher. Ladies and gentlemen, this is why banking standards exist. People walk in with fantasy documents and hope a young teller will be too nervous to ask hard questions. Jasmine whispered, Ma'am, please. Patricia ignored her. Isaac said, You are making a public accusation without completing a private verification. Patricia looked back at him. I am protecting this institution. From what? From fraud. From evidence, Isaac said, because evidence would require you to admit your first judgment might be wrong. For the first time, Patricia's eyes flashed with anger. A man near the wealth management desk muttered, "Just call security." The guard took one step forward. Isaac did not move. His hand rested on the old tin box. Patricia noticed it. "And what is that?" she asked. "Something that does not belong to you." She reached for it anyway. Isaac's hand closed over the lid. "Do not touch that." The words were not loud, but they stopped her. Patricia pulled her hand back as if offended that he had boundaries. She looked at the check again, then at Jasmine. "This is not going into our system." Jasmine's voice shook. "We have to retain it for review if we suspect fraud." Patricia said, "I said it is not going into our system." Then she took the check in both hands. Jasmine stepped forward. "Please do not." Mrs. Parker said from the deposit table, "Young woman, that is someone's property." Patricia did not listen. The paper tore once, then again. 2 clean halves became 4 uneven pieces. The sound was small. The damage was enormous. Everything froze. The security guard stopped moving. Jasmine covered her mouth. Mrs. Parker stood all the way up. The woman in the cream blazer whispered, "Oh my God." Patricia dropped the pieces onto the counter. "There," she said, "problem solved." Isaac looked down. $10 million was not destroyed by torn paper. He knew that. A cashier check could be reissued. Funds could be traced. Banking instruments had records. But the paper was not what tightened his throat. It was the memory. His mother, Lena Monroe, standing in a bank lobby years earlier in a faded cleaning uniform, holding $37 in cash and asking to open a savings account. A teller looking at her hands. A manager saying, "Perhaps you should try a smaller bank." Lena smiling politely, because poor people were often trained to leave quietly when dignity became too expensive to demand. Isaac had been 10 years old. He had asked his mother on the bus ride home, "Why did they not want our money?" Lena had looked out the window and said, "It is not that they do not want money, baby. They just do not believe people like us can have it." Now, 42 years later, Isaac stood in another polished bank lobby, watching another manager prove that his mother had been right. For 1 second, he wanted to leave. Not because Patricia had won, because he was tired. Tired of proving. Tired of staying calm so other people would not call his pain dangerous. Tired of carrying the burden of dignity for people determined to test it. His fingers touched the old tin box. Inside were coins his mother had saved from cleaning office floors. Pennies, nickels, quarters. A folded note in her handwriting. "Every dollar deserves a purpose." Isaac breathed once. Then he looked at Patricia. "Are you sure you wanted to do that?" Patricia stood straighter. "Completely." At that exact moment, the glass office door opened. Thomas Whitaker, regional director of Caldwell National Bank, stepped into the lobby with 2 members of the executive client team behind him. He had been waiting for Isaac in conference room 3 for a private meeting scheduled at 9:30. He was holding a folder labeled Monroe Foundation Transition. He saw Isaac. He saw the torn check. He saw Patricia standing over the pieces like she had just saved the bank from danger. His face turned pale. He walked fast. Not manager fast, emergency fast. Patricia turned toward him, relieved. "Mr. Whitaker, I was just handling a suspicious item." Thomas did not look at her. He stopped in front of Isaac and lowered his head. "Sir, Mr. Monroe, I am deeply sorry. What happened here?" The word "sir" moved through the room like a verdict. Patricia's smile disappeared. The man at the wealth management desk stopped breathing through his mouth. The security guard stepped back. Jasmine looked from Thomas to Isaac, then down at the torn pieces on the counter. Mrs. Parker whispered, "Well now." Thomas looked at Patricia. "Did you verify the check?" Patricia's lips parted. "I believed it was suspicious." Thomas' voice hardened. "Did you verify it?" She said nothing. He looked at Jasmine. "Miss Reed?" Jasmine swallowed. "No, sir. I was beginning large item verification when Manager Caldwell stopped me." Thomas looked at the torn pieces, then at Isaac. The meeting he had prepared for was gone. Something much larger had taken its place. Isaac picked up one torn piece of the check and placed it beside the old tin box. His voice stayed calm. "Your manager did not destroy my money, Mr. Whitaker. She destroyed my first answer." Thomas frowned. Isaac looked around the lobby. "I came here to see whether this bank deserved my mother's name." He touched the tin box. "So far, the answer is no. I came here to see whether this bank deserved my mother's name." Isaac Monroe said it softly, but the sentence carried farther than Patricia Caldwell's accusation had. The lobby of Caldwell National Bank stayed frozen around him. A few minutes earlier, customers had watched him as if he were the embarrassment. Now they were watching Patricia. That shift was small, but Isaac noticed it. People often change sides after power changed direction. They rarely admitted they had been silent before. Thomas Whitaker stood beside the teller counter, pale and rigid, his executive folder still in one hand. The folder said Monroe Foundation Transition. Patricia had not seen it yet. Jasmine Reed had. Her eyes moved from the folder to Isaac's old tin box, then to the torn check pieces on the counter. She understood now that the check was not the only thing Patricia had damaged. Thomas turned to Patricia. "Manager Caldwell, step away from the counter." Patricia blinked. "Mr. Whitaker, I was protecting the branch. Step away from the counter." This time, his voice left no room for performance. Patricia stepped back. For the first time since Isaac walked in, she looked unsure of where to put her hands. Thomas turned to Jasmine. "Miss Reed, please secure the torn instrument in a deposit evidence sleeve. Do not alter it further. Then begin verification with Dominion Trust using the large item protocol." Jasmine nodded quickly. "Yes, sir." Her hands shook, but she moved carefully. She took a clear sleeve from the drawer, placed the torn pieces inside one by one, and wrote the time on the label. 9:21 in the morning, branch number 17, teller station 4. Customer name Isaac Monroe. Instrument amount $10 million. Patricia watched the process as if it were happening in another language. A moment earlier, she had treated the check like trash. Now the bank was treating the torn paper like evidence. That was the third shift. Isaac saw it. So did Mrs. Evelyn Parker, the elderly customer who still stood beside the deposit table with her cane in one hand and pension papers in the other. She looked at Patricia and said, "I hope you understand that careful people verify before they destroy." Patricia's mouth tightened. No one answered. Because Mrs. Parker had said the part everyone else was afraid to say. Thomas turned back to Isaac. "Mr. Monroe, I cannot undo what just happened, but I can begin by asking you to come into conference room 3 while we document this properly." Isaac looked toward the frosted glass room behind him. Inside, he could see a polished table, leather chairs, bottled water, and a small tray of pastries set out for him. Prepared respect. That was what he called it. The kind powerful people received before they said anything. He looked back at the lobby, at Jasmine still working, at Mrs. Parker still standing, at the customers who had watched the humiliation, but only seemed shocked after Thomas said, "Sir." Isaac shook his head. "No." Thomas paused. "No, I was insulted publicly. The first review can begin publicly." Patricia looked embarrassed now, but Isaac did not say it to punish her. He said it because he had seen this trick before. Move the hurt person to a private room, offer water, use quiet words, protect the institution from the sound of its own failure. He was not interested in being hidden for the bank comfort. Thomas understood enough not to argue. He placed the executive folder on the counter. "Then we begin here." The lobby remained still. The security camera above teller station 4 blinked red. Jasmine picked up the verification phone and dialed the issuing bank number from the official directory, not from the check. She did it exactly as procedure required. "Thank you for calling Dominion Trust Commercial Verification," a voice said. Jasmine spoke clearly. "This is Jasmine Reed at Caldwell National Bank, downtown branch number 17. I need to verify a cashier check over $10 million issued to Isaac Monroe." Patricia's face tightened at the words. Issued to Isaac Monroe. Not presented by, not claimed by. Issued to. Jasmine gave the check serial number, then the authorization code, then the issuing officer name. A pause followed. Everyone in the lobby seemed to hold the same breath. The voice from Dominion Trust returned. "The instrument is valid, issued yesterday at 4:16 in the afternoon. Payee, Isaac Monroe. Amount, $10 million. Funding source verified. There is a pre-clearance note for deposit into a foundation or trust account." Jasmine closed her eyes for half a second. Then she repeated the answer for the record. "Valid instrument, payee Isaac Monroe. Amount $10 million. Pre-clearance note for foundation or trust deposit." Thomas looked at Patricia. Patricia looked at the floor. Isaac looked at the old tin box. He did not feel satisfied. That surprised some people. They expected him to smile, to enjoy it, to let the room see Patricia fall. But Isaac had learned long ago that being proven right after being insulted did not remove the insult. It only made everyone more willing to admit what they should have admitted before. The check was real. He had been real before the check was verified. That was what the room still needed to learn. Thomas said, "Mr. Monroe, I am deeply sorry." Isaac nodded once. "I hear you." But he did not say it was all right, because it was not. Thomas knew not to ask for that. Patricia suddenly stepped forward. "Mr. Monroe, I apologize. I did not realize who you were." Isaac looked at her. "That sentence is the problem." Patricia blinked. "What? You did not realize who I was? But I knew who I was when I walked in." The lobby became quiet again. Isaac continued. "You should not need a regional director to tell you I am worthy of basic respect." Patricia swallowed. "I was concerned about fraud." "No, Jasmine was concerned about procedure." "You were concerned that I did not match the picture in your head." Jasmine lowered her eyes, not from shame, from recognition. Isaac saw that too. He reached for the old tin box, but did not open it yet. Not here. Not while Patricia still thought this was only about a check. Earlier that morning, before the bank, Isaac had sat in the kitchen of the small house where he grew up on the south side of the city. He still owned that house, not because he needed it, because leaving it behind felt like pretending the boy who lived there had disappeared. The house had narrow stairs, a kitchen window that stuck in the winter, and a back porch where his mother used to hang uniforms after midnight. The cabinets were old. The table had a burn mark from a pan Lena Monroe once dropped while rushing between jobs. Isaac had replaced the roof twice, but never replaced that table. Some things were not broken. They were witnesses. At 7:30 that morning, Isaac sat at that table with 4 things in front of him. A photograph of his mother, the old tin coin box, a letter from his attorney confirming the first equity sale payment, and the draft documents for the Lena Monroe Scholarship Fund. $10 million. People said the number as if it were magic. To Isaac, it sounded like time. 30 years of warehouse shifts, 14 years of rejected loan applications, 7 years driving delivery trucks through snow with no heater, 5 failed contract bids before the first hospital system trusted him, 2 business partners who left because they thought he was too careful, 1 mother who never saw the sale. He picked up the photograph. Lena Monroe stood outside an office tower in her cleaning uniform, one hand resting on a mop handle, smiling like she had chosen joy instead of waiting for the world to give it to her. Isaac touched the edge of the frame. "Today, Mama," he whispered, "we opened the fund." The house was quiet. The kind of quiet that comes after grief has lived there long enough to become furniture. His attorney had advised him to let a private banker collect the check. His accountant had told him to wire the funds instead. Thomas Whitaker had offered to send an executive team to his office. Isaac refused all of it. He wanted to walk into the bank himself, not to test anyone cruelly, to see. There was a difference. Caldwell National Bank occupied the same building where Lena had once been turned away with $37 in cash. It had changed ownership twice, changed logos, changed carpeting, changed the private banking furniture. But Isaac wanted to know if it had changed the thing that mattered, how it looked at people before it knew their balance. At 8:12, his phone rang. It was his niece, Mariah. "Uncle Isaac," she said, "you are really doing it today." "Yes." "Are you nervous?" Isaac smiled. "About depositing $10 million. About putting Grandma's name on something they cannot ignore." That made him pause. Mariah had Lena laugh, bright at the edges, brave before it needed to be. He looked at the old tin box. She never wanted to be noticed like that. "No," Mariah said. She wanted people like her to be treated right, without needing a building named after them. Isaac closed his eyes. His niece had said the truth before the day even began. "That is why I am doing it," he said. "Then wear the good suit." Isaac looked down at the faded brown coat resting on the chair. "No, Uncle Isaac. I'm going as myself." "You are rich now. You were allowed to look rich." Isaac smiled sadly. "Baby, I did not work this hard just to dress like somebody else's idea of safe." Mariah went quiet. Then she said, "Grandma would say, do not wear money on your body and forget who fed you." Isaac laughed softly. She would. So he wore the brown coat. The same coat he wore on warehouse visits. The same one drivers recognized when he came by at 4 in the morning with coffee during snow season. The same one that smelled faintly of motor oil, no matter how many times it went to the cleaner. He took the check, he took the tin box, and before leaving, he opened it. Inside were coins his mother had saved over years of cleaning office towers. Pennies darkened with age, nickels worn smooth, quarters from payphones and laundromats, a folded note in her handwriting. "Every dollar deserves a purpose." Isaac folded the note again with care. Then he left for the bank. Now, standing in the lobby at 9:29, he looked at that same tin box on the counter and understood why his mother had kept it. Coins were not small when they were saved with sacrifice. Money was never only money. It was hours, hands, knees, back pain, missed sleep, bus rides before sunrise, shoes patched instead of replaced, a mother saying she was not hungry so her child would finish dinner. Patricia had looked at Isaac and seen a man who did not belong in a premium bank. Lena would have seen the boy who knew what every dollar had cost. Thomas Whitaker spoke carefully. "Mr. Monroe, Dominion Trust has confirmed the instrument. We can request a reissue immediately, and Caldwell National Bank will cover every fee and legal step necessary." Isaac nodded. "You will, and I will personally oversee it." "No," Isaac said. Thomas paused. "The bank will oversee it. In writing. Personally is not enough." Thomas accepted the correction. In writing. Isaac looked at Patricia. Manager Caldwell should remain present. Patricia flinched. Thomas frowned. "Mr. Monroe, we can remove her from the floor." "Not yet." Patricia's eyes lifted. Isaac's voice stayed steady. She wanted the lobby to witness her judgment. "The lobby can witness the correction." Mrs. Parker nodded. "Good." Jasmine almost smiled, but controlled it. Thomas turned to Patricia. You will stay silent unless asked a direct question. Patricia, lips pressed together. For 14 years she had controlled this lobby. Now she had to stand inside it without control. That was not revenge, that was evidence finding a shape. Thomas opened the folder he had carried from the private office. The first page showed a meeting schedule. 9:30 in the morning. Isaac Monroe arrival. Foundation services discussion. Potential transfer of operating reserves. Community reinvestment partnership. Scholarship fund launch. Patricia stared at the page. Her mouth parted slightly when she reached the third line. Potential transfer of operating reserves. Thomas looked at Isaac, then at the room. Mr. Monroe is not only the payee of a verified cashier check, he is the founder of Monroe Medical Logistics and the controlling partner of the Lena Monroe Scholarship Fund. Our regional board has been preparing for his visit for 3 weeks. 3 weeks. The words struck Patricia harder than the check verification. 3 weeks of preparation.
3 weeks of emails. 3 weeks of executive attention. And she had destroyed the moment in 3 minutes because his shoes were worn. Thomas continued. The check Manager Caldwell tore was the first deposit toward a charitable fund designed to support students whose parents work in custodial, warehouse, transportation, medical support, and other frontline roles. The lobby changed again, not loudly, but deeply. The woman with a diamond watch looked down. The man who had suggested calling security turned away. The security guard stared at his own shoes. Mrs. Parker's eyes softened. Jasmine looked at Isaac as if she finally understood why the old tin box mattered. Patricia whispered, "I did not know." Isaac turned to her. "No, you assumed, that was all." No speech, no anger, just the blade of the truth. Thomas turned to Jasmine. "Miss Reed, did Manager Caldwell prevent you from following large item verification procedure?" Jasmine froze. Patricia looked at her. The old fear returned for 1 second. 6 months at the bank, student loans, a younger brother she helped support, a manager who wrote performance reviews, a lobby full of people. Isaac saw the battle in her face. He did not rescue her too quickly. Some moments belonged to the person deciding who they were. Jasmine took a breath. "Yes, sir." Patricia's face hardened. Jasmine continued. "I told her the procedure required issuing bank verification and fraud department review. She told me not to lecture her on procedure." Thomas nodded. "Did she instruct you not to enter the check into the system?" "Yes." "Did she tear the check after you warned her not to?" Jasmine looked at Isaac, then at the evidence sleeve. "Yes." The word was small, but it cost her. Isaac said, "Thank you." Jasmine's eyes filled, but she did not cry. Patricia looked at Thomas. "This is being taken out of context," Mrs. Parker spoke from the deposit table. "No, dear, we were all here. The context was very clear." A few people murmured agreement. Patricia turned red. Thomas looked at the security guard. "Secure the lobby recording from 9:10 onward. Include teller station audio if available. Preserve all camera angles, especially camera 2 above the main counter, and camera 5 facing the deposit table." The guard nodded quickly. "Yes, sir." Thomas turned to Patricia. "Your access to client records is suspended pending internal review." Patricia stared. "Thomas, please." "Mr. Whitaker," he corrected. That landed. The room heard it. So did Patricia. The first consequence had arrived, and it was not dramatic. It was professional, clean, precise, just like she had always claimed to be. Isaac looked down at the torn check in the clear sleeve. The paper could be replaced. The moment could not.
And that was why he was not finished. He turned toward Thomas. Before I decide whether my mother name belongs in this bank, I want to see your complaint history. Thomas went still. Patricia looked up sharply. Isaac continued. Not later. Not after legal edits the language. I want the last 2 years of complaints involving account opening refusals, large deposit challenges, private client access, and employee notes using phrases like image risk, inappropriate client, suspicious appearance, or not a fit for this branch. Thomas said nothing. Isaac waited. The lobby waited with him. Finally, Thomas said, "We can begin that review." Isaac looked at him. Begin is not an answer. Thomas swallowed. Yes, you will have it. Patricia whispered, "That is confidential." Isaac looked at her. So was my humiliation supposed to be, once you moved me to a private room? Patricia had no reply. Thomas closed the folder. Mr. Monroe, I understand if you choose to leave. Isaac looked toward the marble floor, then toward the brass doors, then toward the old tin box. For 1 second, he wanted to take his mother's name and walk out. He had enough money, enough lawyers, enough banks waiting to smile at him now that the number was real. But then he looked at Jasmine, at Mrs. Parker, at the guard who had almost moved toward him because another man muttered, "Call security," at the customers who had watched and learned too late, at the lobby where Lena Monroe had once been made small. Isaac picked up the tin box. "No," he said. Thomas looked surprised. Isaac continued. "My mother walked out of a lobby like this because she had no power to make them listen." He looked at the torn check. "I do." He lifted his eyes to Patricia. "So I am staying until this bank tells the truth about what happened here. So I am staying until this bank tells the truth about what happened here." Isaac Monroe said it in the same calm voice Patricia Caldwell had mistaken for weakness. No one in the lobby moved. The marble floor reflected the frozen faces around him. The torn check sat inside a clear evidence sleeve on teller station 4. The old tin coin box rested beside it, small and dented, looking almost out of place in a building that worshipped polished brass and private accounts. Thomas Whitaker looked at Isaac for a long second. Then he nodded. "We will begin now." Patricia turned toward him. "Mr. Whitaker, this is completely inappropriate. Complaint history cannot be discussed in the lobby." Isaac looked at her. "My character was discussed in the lobby." Patricia opened her mouth, then closed it. Thomas spoke to the security guard. "Lock the main recording files. Camera 2, camera 5, and lobby audio from 9:10 in the morning until further notice. No deletion, no overwrite, no routine archive." The guard nodded. "Yes, sir." Thomas turned to Jasmine. "Miss Reed, contact branch compliance. Ask for Veronica Shaw. Tell her we have a client discrimination incident, destruction of a financial instrument, and an immediate preservation order." Patricia stiffened at the words. Client discrimination incident.
Destruction of a financial instrument. Preservation order. Those were not emotional words. They were the kind of words that turned embarrassment into investigation. Jasmine picked up the phone. Her fingers still shook, but her voice did not. "This is Jasmine Reed from Downtown Branch 17. I need Compliance Director Veronica Shaw for an urgent branch incident." Patricia stepped closer to Thomas and lowered her voice, but not enough. "You are letting him control the branch." Thomas looked at her. "No, I'm letting the facts control it." That was when Patricia understood that apology would not be enough. So she changed tactics. Her face softened, her shoulders lowered. Her voice became quieter, almost wounded. "Mr. Monroe, I truly apologize if my tone felt harsh. You must understand, people do attempt fraud. Large checks are serious. A branch manager must make quick decisions." Isaac studied her. There it was. Not accountability, repackaging. If my tone felt harsh. People attempt fraud, quick decisions, words that moved around the action without touching it. Isaac said, "You did not make a quick decision. You made a final decision before checking the first fact." Patricia replied, "The amount was unusual. The amount was verifiable. You had no account here. I came to open one. You were carrying an old tin box." Isaac's hand moved gently to the lid. "Yes." Patricia realized too late that she had said another thing she should not have said. Mrs. Evelyn Parker looked at the box, then at Patricia. "Dear, if an old box makes you suspicious, perhaps the box is not the problem." A small murmur moved through the lobby. Patricia's cheeks flushed. A man near the private banking chairs cleared his throat and looked away. He had been one of the people who shifted closer when Patricia held up the check. Now he seemed deeply interested in his phone. Isaac saw him. He saw everyone. The people who enjoyed the accusation when it had a target. The people who regretted only after the target gained status. That was another kind of balance sheet. At 9:41 in the morning, Veronica Shaw joined by video on a tablet Thomas placed upright on the counter. She was the bank compliance director, based in Chicago, with silver glasses, a calm face, and the tired expression of someone who had heard the phrase "isolated incident" too many times. Thomas summarized quickly. Client presented a verified $10 million cashier check for foundation account opening. Branch manager prevented large item procedure, publicly accused client of fraud, and tore the instrument before verification. Veronica looked at Patricia. "Manager Caldwell, is that accurate?" Patricia said, "I would not characterize it that way." Isaac almost smiled, not because it was funny, because people who fear facts often start fighting verbs. Veronica said, "Did you tear the check?" Patricia hesitated. "Yes." "Was it verified at that time?" "No." "Did the teller advise large item verification first?" Patricia looked at Jasmine. Jasmine held her breath. Patricia said, "She mentioned it, but I used managerial judgment." Veronica wrote something down. Managerial judgment. The phrase sounded clean. The lobby knew it was not. Isaac looked at Thomas. Now, the complaint history. Thomas looked uncomfortable. "Mr. Monroe, we can begin with relevant samples while protecting customer identity." "Good." Thomas opened his tablet and logged into the branch risk portal. Veronica authorized temporary compliance view. A screen appeared with internal categories. Account opening exception, private client referral denial, large deposit hold, fraud escalation, customer complaint, employee concern. Thomas filtered the branch history for the past 24 months. The number loaded. 312 records. The room shifted. Patricia said quickly, "That includes routine issues." Isaac nodded. "Then routine should survive review." Thomas added search terms. Not a fit. Image risk. Unusual appearance. Suspicious presentation. Customer attitude. Potential fraud due to profile. The number dropped. 47 records. Jasmine looked up sharply. 47. Mrs. Parker gripped her cane. Veronica leaned toward the camera. "Open the employee concern category." Thomas clicked. There were 6 employee concerns. 4 had been closed. 1 had been redirected. 1 had no resolution attached. Thomas opened the unresolved file. Employee concern EC 1794, submitted by Jasmine Reed. Date March 4th. Subject, unequal treatment during account opening and large cash equivalent inquiries. Patricia stared at the screen. Jasmine went very still. Thomas read silently for a moment, then looked at her. "Miss Reed, did you submit this concern?" Jasmine nodded. "Yes, sir." Patricia said, "That concern was informal and based on misunderstanding."
Veronica said, "Manager Caldwell, do not characterize the witness statement before it is read." Patricia went silent. Thomas read aloud. "I have observed several customers being discouraged from opening savings, trust, or investment-related accounts after Manager Caldwell described them as not appropriate for this branch or unlikely to qualify. In each case, the customer was dressed casually, worked in a service role, or came from a lower-income postal code. Similar verification concerns were not raised for customers referred by existing wealth clients." The lobby became heavy. Jasmine looked down. Isaac looked at her. "You wrote this 6 months after being hired." Jasmine nodded. "What happened?" She swallowed. "Human Resources acknowledged it. Then it was sent back to branch management for coaching." Patricia was branch management. "Yes." The answer was quiet, but the room heard it. Isaac turned to Thomas. The person she reported was allowed to handle the report. Thomas closed his eyes briefly. Veronica said, "That is a governance failure." Patricia snapped. "It was not discrimination, it was risk awareness." Isaac looked at her. "Risk awareness did not tell you to tear my check." Patricia said, "I made an error." "No," Isaac said, "you made a pattern visible." That sentence stopped her. At 9:58, a second executive came out from the back office. His name was Martin Sloan, Senior Private Banking Officer. He had been waiting for the Monroe meeting, but until now he had stayed behind the glass, hoping Thomas would contain the situation. Isaac noticed him immediately. People who wait behind glass during harm often step forward after the danger becomes expensive. Martin adjusted his tie. "Perhaps we should move this to conference room 3 now. This environment is not ideal for a client of Mr. Monroe's stature." Isaac turned slowly. "Say that again?" Martin froze. "I only meant that someone of your stature deserves privacy." Isaac looked around the lobby. "I deserved privacy before you knew my stature." Martin's face reddened. Thomas gave him a warning look. Martin stepped back. Mrs. Parker said, "A little late to find manners." No one corrected her. At 10:06, Thomas opened several customer complaints. Names were redacted, but the details remained. A delivery company owner had been told his deposit activity did not align with branch profile. A home health nurse had been asked 3 times whether the inheritance check she carried belonged to an employer. A retired school custodian had been discouraged from opening an investment account because the branch manager said the product was likely too complex. A young black contractor with a 6-figure payment from a city project had been referred to fraud review before anyone called the issuing agency. All were closed. No service failure. Patricia stood very still. Isaac felt the old tiredness return. This was not only his mother, not only his check. It never was. The check had simply been large enough to make the insult impossible to bury. He stepped away from the counter and walked toward the side hallway near the safe deposit room. No one followed. For the first time since entering the bank, Isaac stood alone. The hallway was quiet, carpeted, and narrow. A framed poster on the wall showed smiling families under the words, "Your future belongs here." Beneath it, Isaac could hear the muffled voices from the lobby. Compliance, verification, complaint, review. He leaned one hand against the wall. For a moment, the $10 million felt like a stone. He had imagined this day differently. He had imagined signing the scholarship papers, placing the first deposit, maybe telling one small story about Lena Monroe, then going home. He had imagined calling Mariah afterward and saying, "It is done. Your grandmother's name will help children she never met." Instead, he was standing in a bank hallway trying not to let an old wound open in front of strangers. He took the folded note from inside the tin box. Every dollar deserves a purpose. His mother's handwriting was uneven near the end. Arthritis had made her fingers stiff. She had written that note after saving coins for years in kitchens, laundry rooms, office towers, and lobbies where people forgot to say thank you. Isaac closed his eyes. "Mama, I am tired," he whispered. No answer came, but memory did. Lena at the kitchen sink after the bank turned her away. Isaac asking why she did not yell. Lena drying her hands on a towel. Because yelling would have let them talk about my voice instead of their shame. He opened his eyes. That was why he had stayed calm. Not because it did not hurt, because the truth needed room to be heard. He folded the note and returned to the lobby. Patricia was speaking again. "I have served this branch for 14 years. My record speaks for itself." Isaac walked back to the counter. "Yes," he said, "that is exactly what we are asking it to do." Thomas looked at him. Veronica spoke from the tablet. "Mr. Monroe, with your permission, compliance will formally open an investigation under case number CNB 174882. All related records, video, employee reports, customer complaints, and account denial notes will be preserved." Isaac said, "You have my statement." Patricia said, "I object to this being treated as discrimination." Veronica looked directly at her. "Your objection is noted. Your access remains suspended." Patricia's eyes filled with panic. "Suspended?" Thomas said, "Effective now." Patricia lowered her voice. "Thomas, please." "Mr. Whitaker," he said again. This time, there was no mercy in it. Jasmine looked at Patricia with something more complicated than satisfaction. Fear, sadness, relief. For months, Jasmine had thought she was too new to question the branch, too inexperienced, too replaceable. She had seen things that felt wrong and filed one concern, only to watch it disappear into the same office she feared. Now the concern was on a screen in front of everyone. It had not disappeared. It had waited. Patricia turned toward Jasmine. "You did this." Jasmine stepped back. Isaac moved his eyes to Thomas, not because he needed protection, but because he wanted to see whether the bank would protect the right person before being asked twice. Thomas spoke immediately. "Manager Caldwell, you will not address Miss Reed again during this review." Patricia's face hardened. "I trained her," Veronica said, "and she documented what training could not excuse." That sentence landed cleanly. The power shifted again. At 10:24, the fraud department sent its written confirmation. The cashier check was authentic. The issuing bank had already flagged the deposit as expected. The check was connected to an equity sale from Monroe Medical Logistics, a medical equipment transportation company Isaac founded 31 years earlier and partially sold to North Star Health Systems for $184 million. The $10 million cashier check was the first designated charitable fund transfer. Thomas read the confirmation aloud. The lobby heard every word. $184 million. Monroe Medical Logistics. Charitable fund transfer. Expected deposit. Patricia looked sick. The man who had muttered, "Call security," sat down slowly. Mrs. Parker looked at him and said, "You heard that part, did you?" He did not answer. Isaac looked at Thomas. "There should be another email." Thomas checked his tablet. "What email?" "From your regional board." Thomas searched. Then his face changed. He opened an email sent the previous evening. Subject: Welcome Isaac Monroe Foundation meeting tomorrow. The email listed Isaac's name, meeting time, purpose. Estimated initial deposit. Foundation details. It had been sent to regional leadership and copied to branch management.
Thomas looked up slowly. Patricia had been copied. The lobby went silent. Veronica asked, "Manager Caldwell, did you receive this email?" Patricia whispered, "I receive many emails." Thomas's voice was low. "Did you receive it?" She said nothing. Veronica said, "Open read receipt." Thomas tapped the screen. Read by Patricia Caldwell at 7:42 this morning. Everything froze. At 7:42, Patricia had read Isaac's name. At 9:13, Isaac had entered. At 9:20, she tore the check. Jasmine covered her mouth. Mrs. Parker whispered, "Lord have mercy." Isaac stared at Patricia. For the first time that morning, his calm almost broke. Not because she had judged him without knowing, because she may have known enough to do better. Thomas spoke very carefully. "Manager Caldwell, you read an executive meeting notice naming Mr. Monroe and the foundation deposit before this incident." Patricia said, "I did not connect him to the email." Isaac looked down at his coat, then back at her. "Because I did not look like the man in your mind." Patricia did not answer. She did not need to. The email had answered for her. Thomas turned to the security guard. "Please escort Manager Caldwell to the back office. She is suspended pending investigation. Collect her branch keys and access card." Patricia stared at him. "You cannot humiliate me like this." Isaac's voice was quiet. "You mean publicly?" The words struck her. For one brief second, Patricia understood the shape of what she had done. Not fully, but enough to feel the edge. She looked at the lobby, at the customers, at Jasmine, at Mrs. Parker, at Isaac. Then she looked at the torn check in the clear sleeve. Her lips trembled. "Mr. Monroe, I am sorry." Isaac studied her. "For what?" She blinked. "For tearing the check. That is paper." Patricia swallowed. "For embarrassing you. That is closer." She looked lost. Isaac said, "Try again when you understand that the wound began before the paper tore." Patricia had no answer. The guard stepped beside her. She removed her access card with stiff fingers and placed it on the counter. A small plastic card. A quiet sound. A career beginning to crack. As Patricia was led toward the back office, Isaac did not smile. Jasmine noticed that. So did Thomas. So did Mrs. Parker. The room had expected victory to look like satisfaction. Instead, it looked like grief with straight shoulders. Isaac picked up the old tin box. He turned to Thomas. "Now we can discuss my mother fund." Thomas nodded. "Of course." Isaac looked toward Jasmine. "Miss Reed stays." Jasmine looked startled. "Me?" "Yes." "Why?" "Because you tried to follow the procedure when power told you not to. I want the fund built with people who know the difference between caution and contempt." Jasmine's eyes filled. Thomas said, "She will stay." Isaac looked once more at the clear evidence sleeve containing the torn check, then at the lobby where the first lesson had finally begun. Outside, morning traffic moved past the brass doors as if nothing had happened. Inside, the bank had changed. Not enough, not yet. But the floor had cracked under the weight of a truth Patricia could no longer tear in half. The floor had cracked under the weight of a truth Patricia could no longer tear in half. Isaac Monroe stood at teller station 4 with the old tin box in one hand and the torn check sealed in a clear evidence sleeve on the counter. The bank lobby still smelled of lemon wax and expensive perfume, but something sour had entered the air now. Fear. Not the kind Isaac had carried when Patricia accused him, the kind institutions feel when records start speaking. Thomas Whitaker led Isaac, Jasmine Reed, Compliance Director Veronica Shaw on video, and Mrs. Evelyn Parker toward Conference Room 3.
Isaac had refused to disappear into a private room for the first review, but now the verification was documented, the lobby recording was preserved, and the customers had witnessed the correction. Privacy could now protect the process, not the lie. Conference Room 3 had been prepared for a wealthy donor. Bottled water sat in a silver tray. A folder rested at every seat. A small sign on the table read, "Monroe Foundation Strategy Session." Beside it was a printed agenda. 9:30 morning arrival, foundation account opening. Initial deposit of $10 million. Future operating reserves discussion. Community reinvestment partnership. Isaac looked at the agenda and then at Thomas. "You knew I was coming." "Yes," Thomas said. "Your regional board knew I was coming." "Yes." Manager Caldwell read the email at 7:42 this morning. Thomas' jaw tightened. "Yes." Isaac placed the tin box on the table. "Then the question is not whether this bank failed to recognize me." Everyone went still. Isaac continued. "The question is why someone who had my name still could not see me." No one answered. Because no one could. Veronica Shaw adjusted her glasses on the tablet screen. "Mr. Monroe, I want to be clear. The bank will conduct a full internal investigation." Isaac looked at her. "Internal investigations are where public mistakes often go to become private language." Veronica did not flinch. "Then we will add independent oversight." Thomas looked at her. "Veronica." She raised one hand. "No. He is right to ask. That was the next shift. For most of Patricia's career, clients had been divided into people who had to prove they belonged and people who were welcomed before proof. Isaac had entered as the first kind. Now the bank was beginning to understand he could walk out as the second and take the future with him. Thomas opened a secure file on the conference room screen. "Mr. Monroe, before today, our regional board had prepared a proposal for Caldwell National Bank to administer the Lena Monroe Scholarship Fund at no management fee for the first 3 years. We also hope to discuss a broader relationship with Monroe Medical Logistics after the North Star Health System's equity sale." Isaac watched him. "How broad?" Thomas hesitated. "Potentially $60 million in operating reserves, foundation assets, employee savings partnerships, and community development lending tied to medical supply routes." Jasmine's mouth opened slightly. Mrs. Parker whispered, "My Lord, $60 million." Patricia had torn $10 million because she thought it was impossible. She had not even known she was standing in front of $60 million in possible trust. Thomas continued. "The regional board considered this branch important because your mother history was connected to this building. We thought it would be meaningful." Isaac's voice was quiet. "Meaningful for whom?" Thomas stopped. Isaac looked through the glass wall toward the lobby. "For the bank photograph." Thomas did not answer fast enough. Isaac nodded. "That is what I thought." The room became still. Isaac opened the tin box. The lid gave a soft metal click. Inside were coins, old and dull, saved across decades. Pennies, nickels, quarters, a few folded bills. A note in his mother handwriting lay on top. "Every dollar deserves a purpose." Isaac placed the note on the table. "My mother, Lena Monroe, cleaned offices in this financial district for 26 years. She cleaned bank floors after people went home. She emptied trash cans under desks where men approved loans they would never have given her. She polished brass doors she did not feel welcome walking through." He touched the note. "When I was 10, she came into this building to open a savings account with $37. A manager told her perhaps she should try a smaller bank." Jasmine covered her mouth. Thomas looked down. Mrs. Parker's eyes filled with tears. Isaac continued. "She did not shout. She did not curse. She did not ask for a supervisor. She held my hand and walked out. On the bus home, I asked why they did not want our money. His voice tightened for the first time. She said, "It is not that they do not want money, baby. They just do not believe people like us can have it." Silence settled over conference room 3. Not polite silence. Ashamed silence. Isaac looked at Thomas. "Today I came back to see whether this building had learned anything since my mother walked out." Thomas said, "It has not learned enough." "No," Isaac replied. "It has learned how to prepare respect when a calendar invitation tells it money is coming. It has not learned how to offer respect when only a person walks in." That sentence did what Patricia apology could not. It named the system. At 10:49 in the morning, Veronica Shaw opened the complaint archive again. This time, she did not filter only for Patricia name. She filtered the whole branch. 2 years, account opening refusal, large deposit escalation, private client denial, customer complaint, employee concern. The list was longer than Thomas expected. 586 total records, 83 involving discretionary manager override, 47 involving terms related to appearance, neighborhood, client fit, or suspicious presentation. 6 employee concerns, 4 ignored or routed back to branch management. 3 customers later verified as eligible for services they had been denied. Isaac read the summary. Then he said, "Open the oldest." Veronica clicked. A redacted customer complaint appeared. Date, February 2nd. Customer came to open a savings account using cash from settlement check. Customer stated branch manager advised account would be easier at a neighborhood credit union. Customer later opened account at another bank. Complaint closed. No policy violation. Isaac looked at Thomas. That was not Patricia's first mistake. No, it was practice. Thomas closed his eyes briefly. Yes. Jasmine stared at the record. She looked young again, young and angry, the way people look when they realize their fear had evidence all along. "I thought maybe I was overreacting," she said. Isaac turned to her. "That is what bad culture teaches good people to ask themselves." Jasmine's eyes filled. Mrs. Parker reached across the table and squeezed her hand. At 11:07, Thomas received a call from Caldwell National Bank headquarters in Charlotte. He placed it on the conference room speaker. "This is Thomas Whitaker." A woman voice answered. "This is Margaret Ellis, chair of the regional board. I am with General Counsel and the Chief Risk Officer. We have reviewed the incident summary." Thomas looked at Isaac. "Mr. Monroe is present." A pause. Then Margaret spoke differently. "Mr. Monroe, sir, I apologize on behalf of Caldwell National Bank." Isaac leaned back. "Before you apologize, tell me what you were apologizing for." Another pause. The room waited. Margaret chose her words carefully. "For the public mistreatment you experienced at Branch 17. Isaac said, "Too small." Thomas looked down. Margaret tried again. "For the public accusation of fraud, destruction of your cashier check before verification, and failure to follow large item deposit procedure." Isaac said, "Still too small." The speaker went quiet. Isaac looked at the tin box. "Try including the people before me." No one moved. Margaret's voice softened. "For allowing a branch culture where customers were judged by appearance, neighborhood, occupation, and perceived wealth before evidence or procedure. For ignoring employee concerns. For permitting a manager to convert discretion into exclusion.
And for forcing you to bring $10 million before we recognize the dignity your mother should have received with 37. The room became very quiet. Isaac did not smile, but he nodded once. That is a beginning. Margaret exhaled. Mr. Monroe, we would like to preserve the relationship if possible. Isaac looked at Thomas. That depends on whether you want my money or my conditions. Margaret said, We are listening. Isaac opened the folder for the Lena Monroe Scholarship Fund. There will be no foundation account today unless the following terms are put in writing. Thomas picked up a pen. Veronica opened a new case note. Margaret remained on speaker. Isaac spoke calmly. First, Manager Caldwell remains suspended pending investigation, and the investigation cannot be handled only by people who reported to or benefited from her branch performance. Second,
Every complaint in the last 24 months involving customer appearance, neighborhood, occupation, language, large deposit suspicion, or account opening discouragement must be reviewed by an independent civil rights compliance firm. Third, Jasmine Reed, employee concern, will be removed from branch management control and reviewed as protected internal reporting. Any retaliation against her will be treated as a separate violation. Jasmine looked at him. Her lips trembled. Isaac continued. Fourth, this bank will create an objective large item verification checklist. No manager may destroy, refuse, or escalate a negotiable instrument based on appearance, clothing, address, or personal suspicion without documented evidence. Fifth, if the Lena Monroe Scholarship Fund stays with Caldwell National Bank, the bank will waive management fees for the first 3 years and fund free financial education sessions for families of custodial workers, warehouse workers, drivers, nurses' aides, cafeteria workers, and other frontline employees. Thomas wrote fast. Margaret was silent. Isaac added the last condition. Sixth, this branch will place a written service standard at every teller station. Respect is not a premium service. Mrs. Parker whispered, Amen. Margaret finally spoke. Those are significant commitments. Isaac's voice did not change. So was what happened here. General Counsel spoke from the other end of the call. Mr. Monroe, some wording may require legal review. Isaac nodded. Legal review is welcome. Legal erasure is not. No one on the call answered, because the line was too clean to cross in public. At 11:32, the first draft of the preservation notice arrived by email. Subject: Immediate Preservation Order. Branch 17, Incident and Customer Equity Review. Thomas read it aloud. All video, audio, employee communications, client complaints, account denial notes, manager overrides, fraud referrals, training records, and internal reports relating to Branch 17 for the previous 24 months must be preserved, effective immediately. Isaac listened. Then he looked through the glass at the lobby. Patricia Caldwell sat in the back office with the blinds half closed, no longer holding court in her polished kingdom. Her access card was on the counter. Her office nameplate had been turned inward during the inventory. It would have been easy to feel satisfaction. Isaac did not. He felt his mother hand in his again, walking him out of that same building decades earlier. He remembered how small her palm felt inside his, and how hard she had squeezed to keep from shaking. He had once thought money would make that memory less painful. It did not. Money had brought him back into the room. Truth had to do the rest. Thomas stepped closer. Mr. Monroe, the bank is ready to reissue the deposit instrument. Dominion Trust has confirmed they can void the damaged check and issue a replacement by secure courier today. Isaac looked at the torn paper in the evidence sleeve. Do it. Thomas nodded. And the foundation account? Isaac paused. Not yet. Thomas' face fell. Isaac continued. Draft the account, prepare the documents, but the first deposit happens after the board signs the conditions and Jasmine reporting protection is confirmed in writing. Jasmine looked stunned. Mr. Monroe, you do not have to make this about me. Isaac turned to her. "It was about you before I arrived." She did not understand at first. He explained. "You saw the pattern and tried to report it. The system sent your courage back to the person you feared. That is how institutions teach silence."
If your protection is not written into the correction, then the correction is cosmetic. Jasmine's tears finally fell. She wiped them quickly. "I am sorry I could not stop her," Isaac's voice softened. "You were not powerless because you were weak. You were powerless because the bank designed your truth to travel through her desk." Thomas looked like the sentence physically hurt. Good. Some sentences should. At noon, Patricia asked to speak. Thomas refused at first. Isaac allowed it only under one condition. She speaks in this room, on the record, with compliance present. Patricia entered conference room 3 like someone walking into a smaller version of a courtroom. Her blazer remained crisp, but the certainty was gone. The guard stood outside. Veronica remained on video. Margaret Ellis and General Counsel stayed on speaker. Patricia looked at Isaac. "I apologize for tearing the check." Isaac waited. "And for accusing you publicly." He waited. "And for failing to follow procedure." He waited. Patricia's eyes flickered toward Thomas. No one helped her. Isaac said, "You still think the main issue is the check?" Patricia's lips pressed together. "It was a serious error." "No, it was a window." She swallowed. "A window into what?" "Into how you decide who deserves procedure." Patricia looked down. For the first time, she had no polished answer. Mrs. Parker spoke softly. "He was not the first, was he?" Patricia did not respond. Veronica asked, "Manager Caldwell, have you discouraged customers from opening accounts because you believed they were not appropriate for this branch?" Patricia said, "I made judgment calls." Isaac said, "That phrase has carried too many people out of too many rooms." Patricia finally looked at him. "I thought I was protecting standards." Isaac nodded slowly. "I believe that." The room reacted. Patricia looked almost relieved. Then Isaac continued, "That is why it is dangerous. You taught yourself that excluding people was protection. You called contempt a standard until you could do it without hearing yourself." Patricia's eyes filled. "I did not mean it that way." Isaac touched the tin box. "My mother heard it that way 42 years ago." The room went silent. Patricia looked at the small box for the first time as more than an odd object. "What is that?" Isaac opened it and turned it slightly so she could see the coins. "This is what $37 looked like when my mother tried to open an account in this building." Patricia covered her mouth. Isaac's voice remained calm. "You tore $10 million in front of me, but someone like you tore $37 out of her hands before I was old enough to understand the word dignity." Patricia sat back as if the chair had disappeared beneath her. For once, she looked at the past and saw herself standing in it. Not the same woman, the same behavior. That was the reveal the money could not buy. At 12:28, Margaret Ellis spoke from the speaker. "Mr. Monroe, the board will sign the preservation and independent review terms today. We will also authorize temporary removal of Manager Caldwell pending the result of the investigation." Patricia looked up sharply. "Temporary removal?" Thomas said, "You are relieved of branch management duties effective immediately." Patricia whispered, "After 14 years." Isaac looked at her. "Some people lasted 14 years under your judgment too." She had no answer. Jasmine looked at the table, not happy, not cruel, just breathing differently, like someone had opened a window in a room she had been afraid to leave. Thomas turned to Isaac. "Mr. Monroe, what would make this bank worthy of your mother's name?" Isaac looked through the glass wall at the lobby where ordinary customers waited again.
A janitor in a gray uniform had entered with a cart near the far hallway. He paused when he saw the executives gathered in conference room 3, then tried to make himself invisible. Isaac saw him.
Of course he did. He stood and opened the conference room door. "Sir," Thomas said, "where are you going?"
Isaac walked into the lobby. Everyone watched. He approached the janitor. "What is your name?" The man looked startled. "Calvin." Isaac held out his hand. "Mr. Calvin, thank you for keeping this place clean." The janitor stared at the hand, then took it. A small gesture, a simple sentence. But in that bank, on that day, it felt like a correction written in human form. Isaac turned back toward Thomas, the board still listening through the open conference room speaker. "That is where you start," he said. "With the people you trained everyone not to see. With the people you trained everyone not to see." Isaac Monroe said it in the center of Caldwell National Bank while his hand still held the hand of a janitor named Calvin. The lobby did not move. Thomas Whitaker stood near the conference room door. Jasmine Reed stood behind him with red eyes and straight shoulders. Mrs. Evelyn Parker rested both hands on her cane. Veronica Shaw watched from the tablet screen. The regional board listened through the speaker in conference room 3. For the first time that morning, the bank was not looking at wealth, it was looking at work. Calvin stood beside his cleaning cart in a gray uniform with a name patch that had started to peel at one corner. He looked uncomfortable with everyone staring at him. Men like him were used to entering rooms after decisions were made, after clients left, after coffee spilled, after paper cups were abandoned, after polished people moved on. Isaac knew that posture. His mother had carried it. A posture that said, "I am here to keep the place beautiful, but I am not supposed to be noticed inside its beauty." Isaac released Calvin's hand gently. "My mother cleaned buildings like this," he said.
She knew every office by its trash can, every executive by the way he left a coffee cup, every lobby by how quickly the guard stopped looking at her face. Calvin looked down. Isaac continued. "If this bank can prepare a conference room for me because I may bring $60 million, but cannot train its people to greet the man who cleans that room by name, then the problem is not Patricia Caldwell alone." Thomas lowered his head. That was the sentence everyone had been avoiding. Patricia was the visible failure, but the room had protected her for years. The cameras had recorded behavior. The complaint files had stored warnings. Jasmine had raised concern. Customers had left with quiet shame. Employees had adapted. Wealthy clients had enjoyed the comfort of a lobby where exclusion worked in their favor as long as it never spoke too loudly. Then Patricia tore a check in half, and the sound opened the walls. At 1:15 in the afternoon, Caldwell National Bank headquarters issued a formal internal alert. Subject Branch 17, Preservation and Customer Equity Review. All records connected to the downtown branch were frozen. Video, audio, manager override logs, large item verification notes, private client denial reports, fraud escalation files, account opening rejections, employee complaints, training records, emails containing the phrases "not a fit," "image risk," "branch profile," "suspicious appearance," "inappropriate client," and "manager judgment." Patricia Caldwell was removed from branch duties pending investigation. Her access card was disabled. Her office computer was imaged. Her client notes were preserved. The branch employees were told not to discuss the incident privately, not to delete messages, not to contact customers about past complaints, and not to retaliate against Jasmine Reed. Jasmine heard that last part and looked at Isaac. He did not smile. He only nodded. Protection written down mattered. Good intentions without paper were often just comfort. At 2:04 in the afternoon, Isaac finally agreed to move deeper into conference room 3, not for privacy, but for work. The old tin coin box sat in the center of the table. The torn check sat beside it, inside the clear evidence sleeve. One object held $37 in saved coins. One object represented $10 million. By then, everyone in the room understood that the smaller one carried more weight. Thomas placed a new document in front of Isaac. "The board has signed the first conditions," he said. "Independent civil rights compliance review, complaint reopening, employee reporting protection, large item procedure rewrite, fee waiver for the foundation for 3 years, community financial education funding, public service standard at every teller station." Isaac read every page slowly. He did not skim. People who had once been denied by small print deserved someone who read the small print. Veronica Shaw remained on video. "Mr. Monroe, the review firm will be selected within 5 business days, subject to your approval and board approval. Complaints from the last 24 months will be reopened within 30 days. Customers will receive letters informing them that prior account denials or discouragement may be eligible for review." Isaac looked up. Not may have been inconvenient. Not may have fallen short of service standards. Say may have involved unequal treatment. Veronica typed, "Agreed." Thomas watched Isaac sign nothing. "Mr. Monroe, may I ask one question?" "You may." "After everything that happened today, why are you still considering placing the fund here?" Isaac looked through the glass wall toward the lobby. "Because my mother walked out of this building with $37 and no power."
If I walk out with $10 million and leave nothing behind but a scandal, the bank learns fear, maybe shame, maybe public relations. He touched the tin box. But if her name stays here, under conditions strong enough to change how the next person is treated, then the place that made her feel small has to speak her name every day. Mrs. Parker wiped her eyes. Jasmine looked down at her hands. Thomas's voice was low. She must have been extraordinary. Isaac smiled faintly. She was tired more often than extraordinary. People like to make struggle sound poetic after the person is gone. My mother did not need poetry. She needed a fair account, a decent wage, and someone to look at her uniform without deciding her future. The room received that in silence. At 3:30, the replacement cashier check arrived by secure courier from Dominion Trust. 2 couriers entered with identification, sealed delivery pouch, and digital custody receipt. Jasmine verified the courier identification.
Thomas verified the bank authorization. Veronica recorded the procedure. 2 employees witnessed the envelope opening. Everything was careful now, almost painfully careful. Isaac noticed. He also noticed that caution appeared only after disrespect became expensive. Jasmine placed the new check on the table. $10 million. Payee, Isaac Monroe. Memo line, Lena Monroe Scholarship Fund. Initial deposit. No one touched it without permission. Isaac looked at Patricia's old office through the glass. The blinds were now fully closed. Her nameplate had been removed from the lobby desk and placed face down during records inventory. He felt no joy. That surprised even him. He had imagined, for a moment in the hallway, that consequences might feel like justice. They did not. They felt like a door opening into more work. At 4:10 in the afternoon, Margaret Ellis, chair of the regional board, arrived from Charlotte by video with the bank chief executive, the general counsel, the chief human resources officer, and the chief community investment officer. The screen filled with serious faces. Isaac recognized the look. Crisis faces. He had seen them in hospitals when supply chains failed, in boardrooms when contracts collapsed, in warehouses when executives finally noticed the drivers who had warned them for months. Margaret spoke first. "Mr. Monroe, The board has voted to authorize an independent review of Branch 17 and all related customer access practices. Patricia Caldwell employment status will be determined after investigation, but she will not return to customer-facing leadership during the review. Isaac said nothing. Margaret continued. We will also reopen account access complaints from the past 2 years and create a community advisory panel. Who sits on it? Isaac asked. Margaret paused. We were going to discuss that, then discuss it now. The chief community investment officer spoke. We propose 2 bank representatives, 1 compliance representative, 1 local business owner, 1 nonprofit partner, and 1 customer advocate. Isaac looked at Jasmine, and 1 frontline employee chosen by branch staff, not management. Margaret nodded. Agreed. Isaac looked at Mrs. Parker, and 1 customer who has no wealth management account. Mrs. Parker lifted her eyebrows. Do not look at me unless there is lunch. For the first time all day, a few people laughed, not loudly, but the room needed it. Isaac smiled. There will be lunch. Mrs. Parker nodded. Then I will consider civic duty. Thomas added the note. At 5:25, the public statement went out. Caldwell National Bank acknowledges that a customer at our downtown branch was publicly mistreated during a financial transaction.
The customer presented a valid cashier check that should have been handled under established large item verification procedures. Instead, the instrument was destroyed before verification. The branch manager involved has been removed from customer-facing duties pending investigation. The bank is opening an independent review of customer access practices, employee concerns, and prior complaints at Branch 17. Isaac read the statement. He looked at Thomas. It still hides something. Thomas frowned. What? It says a customer. It does not say why the correction matters. General Counsel spoke from the screen. We generally avoid naming protected characteristics in early statements. Isaac said, I am not asking you to label me. I am asking you to name the behavior. Margaret leaned forward. What language do you propose? Isaac answered without looking at notes. No customer should be judged by clothing, race, occupation, address, age, accent, or perceived wealth before evidence and procedure. Respect is not a premium service. The room went silent. Then Margaret said, Add it. General Counsel looked uncomfortable. Margaret repeated, Add it. The revised statement went out at 6:01. By 6:45, local reporters were outside the branch. By 7:30, the story had spread online. The headline was not the one Patricia would have feared most. Bank manager tears up $10 million check. That was dramatic, but the story that lasted was quieter. Respect is not a premium service. The next morning, Patricia Caldwell appeared for her formal interview with 2 attorneys. She said she had acted under fraud prevention concerns. The records disagreed. Camera 2 showed Jasmine beginning the proper verification. Audio captured Patricia stopping her. The read receipt showed Patricia had opened the Monroe Foundation meeting email before Isaac entered the lobby. Employee Concern 1794 showed Jasmine had already warned the bank about unequal treatment. The complaint archive showed the pattern was older than that morning. Patricia said she had not intended discrimination. The investigator asked whether intent changed the effect. Patricia had no answer. 2 weeks later, Caldwell National Bank terminated her employment for destruction of a client financial instrument, failure to follow large item procedure, retaliation risk toward a reporting employee, and repeated discretionary exclusion inconsistent with bank policy. But Isaac insisted the public update not end with Patricia's name. One person can cause harm, he told the board. A system decides whether harm becomes normal. So the bank announced more. Branch 17 would undergo independent monitoring for 12 months. All large item refusals would require documented, objective reasons. No employee concern could be routed back to the manager named in the concern. Customer account denials would be audited by zip code, occupation,
race, where legally available, language access, and referral source. Private client eligibility would be explained in writing. Frontline employees would receive protected reporting access. A community financial access clinic would open monthly in the lobby after normal banking hours, staffed by employees paid overtime, not volunteers posing for photographs. Jasmine Reed was promoted to community banking liaison. She did not ask for the title. Isaac supported it only after confirming she wanted it. "I am scared," she admitted. "Good," Isaac said. "Good. If you are not scared, you may forget what courage costs." 3 months later, the Lena Monroe Scholarship Fund launched in the same lobby where the check had been torn. The marble floor was still polished. The brass doors still shone. The private banking rooms still had frosted glass. But the room felt different because the people inside it were different. Custodians came in wearing uniforms. Warehouse workers came in with their children. Drivers arrived after long shifts. Nurses' aides stood beside cafeteria workers, bus mechanics, home health workers, janitors, and delivery clerks. No one asked them to try a smaller bank. At the front of the lobby stood a framed photograph of Lena Monroe. She was smiling in her cleaning uniform, one hand on a mop handle, eyes bright with the kind of strength that never made speeches because it was too busy surviving. Below the photograph was a simple line: "Every dollar deserves a purpose." Beside the photograph sat the old tin coin box. The first scholarship recipients stood in a row. 50 students from families who knew what late shifts did to the body and what unpaid bills did to the mind. Each student received a scholarship letter, a savings account with no maintenance fees, and access to financial coaching for their family. Jasmine stood at the door, greeting every person by name. Not sir, only when money appeared. Not ma'am, only when status was clear. Just dignity first. A boy in a school uniform entered with his mother, who wore a cleaning company badge clipped to her shirt. He looked at the marble floor and slowed down. His mother whispered, "Come on, baby." He whispered back, "Are we allowed in here?" Jasmine heard him. She crouched to his level. "Yes, you are. This place is supposed to serve your future, too." Isaac stood near the photograph of his mother and heard every word. For a moment, he had to look away. Thomas Whitaker approached beside him. "The first 50 scholarships have been funded," Thomas said. "The next round opens in January. The board approved expansion if the independent review benchmarks are met." Isaac nodded. "Good." Thomas hesitated. "Mr. Monroe, I used to think service meant remembering the names of our biggest clients." Isaac looked at him. "What do you think now?" Thomas watched Jasmine welcome another family. "Service means learning the names of the people who never expected us to remember them." Isaac did not praise him. He only said, "Keep thinking that after the cameras leave." Thomas nodded. "I will." Mrs. Evelyn Parker arrived late, wearing her lavender coat and carrying a small envelope. Isaac smiled. "Mrs. Parker, I am glad you came." "I came to make sure they fed people." "They did." "Then perhaps reform is possible." She handed him the envelope. Inside was a copy of the witness statement she had written the day Patricia tore the check. Isaac read the first line. "I saw a man ask for procedure and receive contempt." He looked up. Mrs. Parker's voice softened. "I should have spoken sooner." "You spoke when it mattered." She shook her head. "No, I watched for years before that. I saw little things, a tone here, a look there. People turned away politely. I told myself maybe I was misunderstanding." Isaac folded the paper carefully. Bad systems survive on maybe. Mrs. Parker's eyes filled. "Then I am done giving maybe to things I know are wrong." Isaac nodded. That is how justice begins to become a habit. Later that afternoon, Isaac stepped outside the bank alone. The city moved around him, traffic on Madison Avenue, a bus sawing at the curb, a delivery driver rolling a cart over a cracked sidewalk, a woman in a hotel uniform hurrying toward the subway entrance with her lunch bag tucked under one arm. Isaac looked up at the limestone building. 42 years earlier, his mother had walked out of that door with $37 and a lesson no child should have had to learn. It is not that they do not want money, baby. They just do not believe people like us can have it. He held the tin box in both hands. For most of his life, Isaac thought success meant proving them wrong. Build the company, win the contracts, pay the workers well, sell the equity, walk back in with $10 million. But standing there, he understood that proving them wrong was not enough if the next child still had to prove the same thing. So he had done something better than revenge. He had made the proof useful. The scholarship fund did not erase what happened to Lena. The policy changes did not erase Patricia tearing the check. Jasmine's promotion did not erase the months she spent being ignored. Mrs. Parker's statement did not erase the years she stayed quiet. But justice was rarely the erasing of pain. More often, it was the refusal to let pain end as only pain. Isaac returned inside for the final photograph. The bank photographer tried to arrange him in the center beside executives. Isaac shook his head. Put the students in the center. The photographer blinked. Sir? The students, Isaac said. So they moved. 50 young people stood beneath the marble ceiling. Their parents stood behind them. Jasmine stood near the edge. Thomas stood on the other side. Mrs. Parker sat in the front row. Calvin, the janitor Isaac had greeted on the day everything changed, stood near the back until Isaac waved him forward. Calvin shook his head. I am working, Mr. Monroe. Isaac smiled. Then work from the front for one picture. Calvin laughed and came forward. The photograph was taken. No torn paper, no accusation, no apology trying to escape responsibility. Just faces that belonged there because they had always belonged there. That evening, Isaac went back to the old house on the south side. He placed the tin box on the kitchen table beside the photograph of Lena Monroe. The room was quiet. The same table, the same burn mark, the same window that stuck in winter. He opened the box and took out one quarter. Then he placed a copy of the first scholarship letter inside. For a long time, he sat alone. This was the scene no one in the bank would see. The man they had humiliated in public, sitting in the house where his mother once counted coins, feeling the weight of a victory that still hurt. He whispered, "We did it, Mama." Then he corrected himself. "We started it." Because Isaac knew what his mother would have said. A fund is good, a policy is good, a public apology is good. But the real test would come on an ordinary Tuesday, when no wealthy founder was watching, when no camera was recording, when a tired woman in a work uniform walked through the brass doors with $37 and asked to open an account. Would the bank see her? Would the teller smile? Would the manager follow procedure? Would the guard greet her? Would the system remember that respect is not a premium service? That was the only ending that mattered. So if this story reminded you of someone who was judged before they were known, write their name in the comments. If you have ever watched a quiet person carry more dignity than the people trying to shame them, share this story. And if you believe no one should need $10 million to be treated with basic respect, subscribe for more stories where the overlooked are finally seen, the powerful are held accountable, and justice begins when one person refuses to look away. Because Patricia Caldwell thought she was tearing up a fake check. She was wrong. She tore open the truth. She revealed a bank that knew how to welcome money, but had forgotten how to welcome people. And when her boss stepped into the lobby, lowered his head, and called Isaac Monroe Sir, the entire room finally understood the lesson Lena Monroe had been carrying for 42 years. The value of a human being is not printed on a check. It is not stitched into a suit. It is not proven by a balance. It is carried in their dignity. And dignity is the one thing no one else has the right to tear in half.